Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and there's breaking news in the NFL that a former Minnesota Viking has signed in Chicago and could have implications in the NFC North. It's Case Keenum. Case Keenum has signed as the backup quarterback of the Chicago Bears just moments ago. And if we want a tiny little breakdown of that, Case Keenum, everybody, still in the National Football League and solidifying the fact that this man is a journeyman's journeyman. So shout out to Case Keenum for continuing to get jobs in the NFL, but that does take another backup quarterback out of the mix. He signed for $3 million. So I think the Vikings probably do have a good idea of who they are going to make JJ McCarthy's backup at some point. But now we know who it's not going to be. It is not going to be the nostalgia. It's not going to be the second stint with the Minnesota Vikings. Like, what? Did Gus Frerotte have 2 stints? Brad Johnson had multiple stints. That won't be the case, sadly, for Case Keenum. He's going to be in Chicago, but he could tell all the Vikings secrets. No, that doesn't exist either. So it's a completely different coaching staff. But there were some people who had reached out to me and said, hey, is Case Keenum an option for the Vikings? And my thought was, well, I think he would make a great mentor for a young quarterback. That's for sure. But the issue would be, do you want him to play football games at this point? And I would say probably not. He did get in a couple games, 2-3 years ago for the Houston Texans. Didn't exactly look like Minneapolis Miracle Case, which now, if you guys looked up and realized how long it's been, this happens to me with my marriage sometimes, where I look up and I'm like, it's been a while. We've been really at this for some time, haven't we? Feels the same way with that, doesn't it? Where, like, do you realize how long ago the Minneapolis Miracle really was? 2017. The Vikings are about to head into the 2025 season, which means it's almost been, you can do the math, I mean, almost 10 years since the Minneapolis Miracle. So it's been a while, but Case Keenum still in the National Football League. I think the thing is, the Vikings are going to hold out for somebody who maybe they could trust a little bit more if they needed to start over multiple games rather than looking for just a mentor for JJ McCarthy and maybe someone who will press McCarthy a little bit more in training camp than, say, Case Keenum. So there is your Case Keenum update. And again, much respect to Keenum, who I enjoyed covering in 2017 very much with his journeyman story. And if we're doing an all-time list of journeyman quarterbacks for the Minnesota Vikings or just all-time in history, I think Case Keenum belongs on that list. A guy who was part of one of the biggest moments in NFL history, led a 13-win season, played for a ton of different teams, a highly loved type of player who's been around several times with the Houston Texans, I think 3 different times, which if you're with a team multiple times, it boosts your journeyman status to begin with. So one of the greats, and good for him signing with Chicago. But let's get into tonight's topic, which is, I've been talking a lot this week about the stick and pick idea. And I've decided that this might be my thing. I might make this my thing, is as much as I like trading down for draft simulation purposes, you get more picks. You have more fun with a draft sim when you do it. I'm wondering if the Vikings want to stick and pick, because the more we talk about, well, yeah, there's a lot of great players in this draft and 15 through 50 aren't that big of a difference. When I actually looked at the research, when I actually looked at it last night for an article I wrote over at purpleinsider.football, I went, oh, it's now almost never like that. It's almost never the fact that the 15 through 50th are similar or even close to the same. Even when number 40 through 50, so this is how I did it. I looked at the 2 extremes. I looked at the early part, which was 15 through 25, and then I looked at number 40 through 50. And I used Pro Football Reference's weighted approximate value to add up how much approximate value had come from picks 15 through 25 and then 40 through 50. And almost every single year, it wasn't close. there was one year, 2020, where Antoine Winfield Jr. was in there and a couple other good players, and it was almost close, but it wasn't really because Justin Jefferson was also taken that year in the 15 to 25 range. So then I became a little more convinced that the higher impact players come from the top. I mean, shocker, right? But it was significant in how many more high impact players came from 15 through 25 historically and then 40 through 50. So if they were the same, even in the best years, you would see about the same number of impact players, but I didn't. And if the Vikings theory is not the traditional way of analytically thinking, which would be, well, trade down, accumulate more picks. But we talked about that with 2022. And if you go all the way back for long time listeners of the show in 2022, my issue with the trade down was the history of it, that Hall of Famers and Pro Bowlers are drafted in the top 15, not at number 32 overall. And who knows who they would have picked? Maybe it would have been Jamison Williams, and maybe we would have argued about it for 3 years until the guy became good. Maybe it would have been Jordan Davis, and he would have been not that good. Or maybe it would have been Kyle Hamilton, and he would have been incredible, but Josh Metellus would have never played, or something like that. Like, who knows, right? How that would have played out had they picked then. But my argument against that trade down was just that I thought they went too far in that trade down in 2022. And I'm sure, we've gone over it 10,001 times about what happened then. But if they traded down this year into the 40s or somewhere in there, it would be the same kind of thing. It's like you still have a good shot in the back end of the first round of getting a high impact player. And if you trade out of that, your odds just go down with each one of those trades. So I'm starting to get a little bit more convinced that the places to trade down to accumulate guys are more of trading down from that pick in the third. And every pick you go down, you do make some sort of sacrifice of your odds. But I think the odds between picking number 24 and say number 40 are different than from picking 97 or 110, where everybody's just kind of picking guys that their scouts like and throwing darts and just hoping. So that's part of the theory of why I wanted to talk about this, my top 5 players as of this moment. The list could change, that I think the Vikings should just stick and pick if the player is on the board, because I think they could have the most short and long-term impact. So I'm going to run through that list in just a moment. But I want to say, this is a great time of year for you guys, you who are watching live, because we don't have news. I don't have to spend 40 minutes breaking down something, yelling at myself here. The Rodgers thing is quieted. I don't have headlines to go through that are big breaking news, so forth. That means I got lots of space for any and all questions you could throw my way. So whatever's on your mind, whatever you got, fire it up in the comments. Let's talk football. And Max, my sunburn recovery, it's okay. The thing is that no matter what, I always, when I'm down here in the studio and I'm huffing and puffing, talking football, my face always turns red anyway. It has since I was 5 years old. I don't know why. When I would play sports, people would be like, "Are you okay?" I'd be playing basketball. My face is beat red. I'm fine, but I don't know why. It just happens. Every time I see somebody else who's an athlete whose face turns red like this when they play sports, I'm like, "Hey, you got whatever I got." So I think there's no sunburn left. It's just that we fired it up. We're talking football, so my face is still a little red. Hard to kind of tell though. Anyway, that's the first question. So I'm also interested in what you guys think for players that you would stick and pick for. So let's see. Matt sent his list. We'll see how similar it is. He says guesses Barron, Harmon, Burden, Nolan, and Zabel. Interesting list. We'll get to that in just a minute. JP says positional value matters, so I'd say Nolan and Harmon should be in consideration as well as Zabel, but guys like Starks, Eminware seem to be gems, so I wouldn't be too upset if they drafted them. I will reveal the list momentarily. Ron says Case has made a lot of money for an undrafted free agent. He absolutely has. All the credit to Case Keenum, who is as earnest of a dude as you're ever going to come across. Just, it was so much fun in 2017 to follow him. I'm glad he's still in the NFL. So let's get to the list. I don't want to spend any more time screwing around. And then we'll get to your questions. So put them in the chat and we'll have a real fun conversation. The list is who would I stick and pick? Number 5 of the who I would stick and pick, Michigan defensive tackle Kenneth Grant. So this goes a little bit against where I had normally stood with the defensive tackle position, which was, hey, I only want those guys who are big sack numbers in college, big pressure numbers. But then, I started to look a little bit more underneath the hood with Kenneth Grant. And what I noticed was that he has a pass rush win rate of 9.4%. Usually the bar for being elite is around 10. But for a guy who is 6'3" and 340 pounds, this is reminiscent a little bit to me of Vita Vea. And if the Vikings could draft their version of Vita Vea, an unusually sized person who can move like a mongoose and be this big and line up right over the A gap, right over the center, and just be a problem pretty much right away, to pair with the defensive tackles they have and to pair with the defensive tackles that they are developing, somebody who can get after the passer maybe a little bit more than he's given credit for. His pass rush grade on true pass sets. So this is a very important stat because pass rush grade, I mean, if they throw a screen, you're not just getting any credit at all for that. But true grade is when you're talking about an actual drop back, not a play action, not a screen pass or something. It was a 77.3 for Kenneth Grant. And that goes along with his elite run stuffing in a league that, let's not forget, is still running the ball. And if that was a long-term option to eventually move on from Harrison Phillips as he gets older and replace around him, I am not against it at all. And the more of these beasts that you can throw in there, the more monsters in the middle, the better. Loaded up, I would stick and pick for that guy. That is a long-term option. And I think if you look at somebody like Dexter Lawrence, I don't want to say that he'll become Dexter Lawrence, but when you look at Dexter Lawrence, he did not come into the league and sack the hell out of everybody right away. He waited for the playoffs over Ezra Cleveland to do it. No, but it took a couple years. And so it might be one of those things where you could draft him. He's a big part of the rotation early on, and then he becomes that pass rusher as he develops over years because he has the raw, freakish skill to do it. Will he actually be there? That's debatable. Some draft sims think that he will. Some think that he won't. I tried to pick guys who on consensus, mock draft consensus, were somewhere between 15 and 25, 15 and 30. So obviously I didn't say, I'd stick and pick for Travis Hunter. To some people, Kenneth Grant is that, but I think I would take him because he is such a unique talent that I think could just get better and better at getting after the passer. The next one, and Matt, who guessed, had Jahdae Barron, and I do have Jahdae Barron because I think he would be a great fit for Brian Flores. In some ways, he reminds me of Byron Murphy. Oh, he's not, oh my gosh, his wingspan is so insane or something, or his 40 was good, but it's not, oh, whoa, it's crazy. But playmaking on the football, high IQ, aggressive play, can take guys one-on-one, but also can play in zones and is really intelligent. That to me is just such a good fit. You want multi-versatile type of players for Brian Flores. If he were to drop, which we do see the cornerback position drop sometimes. I mean, look at last year, Terry and Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, those guys. Unfortunately, the Eagles, for the rest of the NFC, unfortunately, the Eagles got 2 of them. But those were guys who were projected to go in the first round. And Quinyon Mitchell was projected to go super high. And he ended up going in the 20s. So Jahdae Barron will go on that list for me of a corner that you can put in place, have there for a very long time. And you don't have to throw him in right away because you do have Isaiah Rodgers. You do have Mekhi Blackman. I like what Blackman did 2 years ago, but I also don't think that Blackman's presence or the development of Dwight McGlothern should mean, just ignore that position. I think it's still valuable for the future. Number 3 on my list of guys I would stick and pick. You guys guessed it. We've talked about him a lot. Derrick Harmon. It cannot be said enough how much of an all-around player Derrick Harmon was. And I think there is a little buzz that is gaining for Derrick Harmon since the combine. People saw how he moved, but when you go and look at his numbers, That stat I told you, the true pass set grade, 91. And the pass rush win rate, 17.6% for this guy, pass run rush win rate, which is off the charts. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal pass rush win rate. And when it counted the most, he was able to get after the quarterback. I like Kenneth Grant and what he can do with his size and the potential for him to improve as a pass rusher. 6'5", 310, Derrick Harmon. Just do that. Apologize to no one. Get after the passer from all angles in the future and be a big old problem. I would stick and pick and take him. Now, this one won't surprise you either because he's been one of my favorite players to discuss. NDSU guard Gray Zabel. Now, I go back and forth a little bit because I don't want to overrate Tyler Booker or his combine or overdo it with a guy having a bad combine because he's a guard and size matters, power matters, and how much does quickness truly matter as a guard depending on how you play. But I do think the Vikings, with the running backs they have, want to play in a zone type of system where you are asking your guys to move and you are asking them to get out and reach linebackers. And Gray Zabel from NDSU, I also like the fact that he can compete right away with Blake Brandel, does not necessarily have to play right away. Maybe it would be a midseason change if they wanted to make that adjustment. But the upside of Gray Zabel is extremely high. And I know it's hard to try to figure out, well, how's he going to make that transition and things like that, which is totally understandable. But I always look for that of, well, what kind of athlete is this guy? Does he have the athleticism to make that adjustment? And we saw it at the combine, and his numbers are just astronomical. He's played different positions in college, but against the competition, he demolished the competition. He allowed 1 sack all of last year and 2 quarterback hits and 4 pressures. That is a total of 7 pressures against the quarterback for Gray Zabel in all of last year, which I think the competition at his level is better than people give it credit for. And one of the things I look for is, well, when did he play teams that were above his level and how did he perform? And there's not a ton of those types of games, but they did play at Colorado to start the season. And this actually reminded me of like a Khalil Mack thing, where Khalil Mack went to the University of Buffalo, didn't play the best competition in the MAC, but he had this game against Ohio State where he just demolished everybody, and that put him on the map. Well, Gray Zabel played against Colorado. That's really good competition and graded 90.1 by PFF against Colorado. It was one of the better teams that he faced all year and did really, really well. So I think that combined with his Senior Bowl performance, he is a possible plug and play, but even if he has to develop a high ceiling to plug in at guard. And the thing is, doesn't this line feel like it's one serious dude away from being filthy? Like it's good. It's good. It's a good line right now. It's a really good line if both tackles are healthy. Will Fries is a $18 million player. It better be good. But if that left guard position is an impact player and there's no clear weakness and there's actually clear strengths, and if he's got a little nasty to him, people aren't going to want to play your team. And that's exactly what the Vikings have been looking for I don't know how long. When was the last football game? And it's happened throughout the years, but when was the last stretch of time where you said this Vikings offensive line imposed their will? And boy, they made a joke of the other team's defensive line because they just powered through them. It was probably 2019 because Riley Reif was a pretty nasty guy. Josh Klein did a good job on that line. They ran the ball so well under Kevin Stefanski, and they did the screen stuff really well. But that was probably the last time that you really said, wow, that team on the run game specifically could impose their will. It just doesn't happen that often. So number one, there's a lot of potential options here, but I went with the number one player I would stick and pick is Malaki Starks, the Georgia safety that I had not early in the process thought as much about safety, maybe positional value there. But the thing is, I'm going through a little draft sim here, and I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I'm waiting, and there's no safeties that have been taken. The idea of getting the best safety in the entire draft is pretty attractive. And Malaki Starks, I think, is a uniquely talented player. And I also think it's a unique defense. And that Harrison Smith could cross train someone to be in the future and in today. Malaki Starks is also pretty young, 21 years old, lots of room to develop his talents. And I just like the way this guy moves. So you put him in, doesn't have to start right away with Theo Jackson there and Jay Ward there. Or if he's just awesome, he starts right away with Harrison Smith and gets to play with one of the GOATs at that position of all time, and then takes that guy's position after a year. That is a very favorable situation for Brian Flores. So that's the list. Kenneth Grant, Jahdae Barron, Derrick Harmon, Gray Zabel, and Malaki Starks, the 5 players that I would tell the Vikings, hey, just take them. Just take them. Because I think these prospects are ahead of the next group. They're not the elite of the elite, which play, the Travis Hunter, the Cam Ward, they play quarterback or they play wide receiver. But, and that I think some of you thought I was going to put Luther Burden. I did think about that, but I also don't think that Luther Burden's difference, like his gap with the other wide receivers, is big enough to put him there. I think if you traded down, you could still get a very good wide receiver. I like wide receiver at the top. I've mentioned it enough times, but I'm not sure this one guy is so far ahead of Golden or the other wide receivers that are out there that I would say, oh man, you have to stick and pick if it's this guy. I've liked him specifically as a fit, but I don't think he is way out in front. Although I did watch a collection somebody put together of deep throws to Luther Burden today, and I felt bad for him. Their quarterback was very bad. So he's probably even better than some of his numbers suggest. Okay, so your thoughts, your questions, comments, anything football on your mind, throw it out here. We'll have a good discussion. Clay Petrie, the intern here for Purple Insider, standing by. Later in the show, he's got his 5 questions for me for Clay's Corner. Got some fun stuff for you. So we'll go through that as well. Let's get to Clifford says, not sexy, but Zabel is who we want. O'Neal isn't getting any younger and could bounce him back outside after his tour of duty at left guard. Well, that's true. I mean, I think that's true for multiple positions with Zabel. It could be Brian O'Neal's right tackle, depending on how the next couple of years go. Because when you draft a guy like that, you're thinking second contract guy. You're thinking long-term left guard, and potentially he could move out to tackle, or just in the very short term, he could go from left guard to center after Ryan Kelly. And the fact that he's played every position on the line, I mean, you saw this does matter, because you saw when it came to Dalton Reisner last year, what a good job Dalton Reisner did at right guard. And he had been a right tackle in college, and then he had played left guard in the NFL mostly. And then he made the switch and he was able to do it. I think it's a specific talent for guys who maybe have bounced around and haven't held down one position, that it's easier for them to do than it is for someone who, say, has been a left tackle for their entire life. So I agree with you that the positional flexibility of Gray Zabel in college does give him the potential to start at left guard, move over to center, move over to right tackle, if he's good enough to be a tackle in the NFL. But I do think he's probably an interior guy. Delton says, as far as team needs, what do you think of us needing? Nose tackle, defensive tackle, I kind of think similar, they're sort of the same. Cornerback and or safety. As far as team needs, yeah, I mean, I would throw in guard. I don't think it's a dire need. I don't think anything's actually a dire need. I would probably rank safety and corner as a hard one to decide whether it's 1 or 2. Safety is not considered as much of a premium position. And the reason why, go look at free agency, where teams found free agent safeties. Trayvon Morig, Justin Reed, Cam Bynum. Teams were able to go out and get free agent safeties. And so it's a little easier to find in free agency than some other positions. But as far as an actual, just if we're doing pure need and we're not trying to add in positional value or anything, I think safety might be number 1. And that's no disrespect to Theo Jackson, who deserved his contract and could be a rotational player for them if they draft Malaki Starks. I like Theo Jackson's potential as somebody who's developed over a couple of years, but he hasn't really played a lot, and he was a 6th round draft pick. And if you could get one of the best players in the whole draft, then you just do it and figure out a place for Theo Jackson later, the same way that they did for Josh Metellus. So I might put safety at the top. Plus, even if Theo Jackson is good, Harrison Smith, this is probably it. We said that last year, but this could really truly be it for Harrison Smith. So you have to start planning for the future with Harrison Smith and the safety. And I always tend to look at not just 1 year, but also 2 years down the road. That's part of the wide receiver argument is, hey, Addison's going to be pretty expensive soon and Naylor's hitting free agency. So, but safety is a now and later potential need. Corner is a little less now that we have come to the information from Kevin O'Connell that they really like Isaiah Rodgers, and that's a Brian Flores guy. Still, long-term corners, Byron Murphy, maybe Mekhi Blackman, maybe Dwight McGlothern, maybe Isaiah Rodgers, who's only played 500 snaps one time in his career. You'd like to also throw in maybe this guy that you drafted in the first round would also be it. So safety is probably number one for me, then corner, then I would go left guard, then defensive tackle / nose tackle in that spot. I think that would probably be the most pressing in the list. Then, hey, my wide receiver spot comes in after that. Steven says, you could talk new rule changes. That is a good idea. And I think Clay wants to talk about that a little more later. How it might impact the Vikings, if at all. Maybe we lean toward a day 3 prospect with return experience. Well, that Rodgers also is a guy that they mentioned as a potential returner. Ty Chandler still on the team, who is a good returner. I know that they have just he's the guy they never speak of, but he is a pretty talented kick returner. The new, I got to tell you, I loved overall the kick return last year. I know a lot of people hated it. I liked it. I thought it increased how often there was returns. It wasn't quite as insanely dangerous. Some teams did some fun stuff with it, but it wasn't cartoonish or silly or annexation of Puerto Rico. Little Giants. It wasn't like some sort of goofball football that we saw and insane wild plays or whatever, but some teams got creative and we saw some returns for touchdown. It felt normal to me other than how it looked at the very start of the play. But now changing it to move out to the 35 is, come on. I don't want the kick return to impact the game that much. And if you go out to the 35-yard line, you need 2 pass completions to kick a field goal. I think that maybe they want some more scoring in the NFL. I don't know if that's it, that maybe the narrative that defense came back and running was back. They're like, no, we want passing. We want fun. Did people not enjoy football last year? I did. Did people not show up for football last year? I did. You did. I don't know. I don't think we needed more scoring. I think scoring has been at a really good place. And I really don't think we need 70% of the kick returns happening. I wanted an increase. I wanted those players to matter, but I don't want it to matter to the point where you're getting a lot more players injured and it is having a massive impact on every game. I'm not much in favor of that. So how it could impact the Vikings, I think they brought in some players. Rondale Moore is one of them. Isaiah Rodgers, one of them, who we could see do some returning. They might, day 3, maybe you look for someone with a little bit of, if you're looking at a wide receiver, which I think they could on day 3, maybe a little bit of experience. But the thing is, a lot of great receivers return because they're just the best guy with the football. But maybe that's somewhat of a factor now that it's going to impact the play. So I think you could be right about that. There will be a big competition for that position. Let's see. Jana says, Harmon says the person from Oregon, totally objective. But hey, if you went to Oregon and you love Oregon, you watch Oregon all the time and you want Derrick Harmon, that tells you something. Because I haven't watched every Derrick Harmon down, but you probably did as an Oregon fan. I look at mostly the data and the times that I saw him play, and I thought, who is this beast? And turns out he was a beast all season long. Grant would get a stamp of approval. He's Pat Williams. Hey, if he's Pat Williams, that would be great. Dexter Lawrence was who I was thinking of, someone who developed, but even if he's Pat Williams, like that player has a big impact. And I like a lot of what Harrison Phillips can do. I do. I think he's a good football player and he does a lot of subtle stuff that maybe is hard to pick up on. And I actually had a great conversation with Harrison Phillips last year. He was coming off a game where he had his highest PFF grade of the season. So I went up to him and I asked him about it. And he said, like one of the things that's hard for PFF to grade me is because I switch gaps after the snap sometimes. So I might be moving backward a little bit, but I have to jump a different gap to move my blocker and then allow for the linebackers to get into the backfield, which takes kind of quickness and timing the snap well and getting away from the reach block. And there's a lot of technique to it. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. Having Harrison Phillips explain football to me was great. He went to Stanford, but I got it. Like I understood what he was saying, that he has a unique element to him of the size of near a nose tackle, traditional nose tackle, but who is doing different stuff because Brian Flores is creative up there. However, they are playing a 3-4 type of system. And I've said before, well, it's, Jonathan Grenard isn't like dropping back a lot. He's really a pass rusher. They play nickel a lot. It's not traditional 3-4. But if you have the Dexter Lawrence, if you have the Pat Williams, you just take two bodies, Casey Hampton back in the day, and you just devour them. And to do that with a shade of pass rushing ability, which I think could be developed like Kenneth Grant, you've got my attention. You've got my interest when it comes to that. But I still like Derrick Harmon a little better because he just goes and gets quarterbacks. Skol SC says, don't want a defensive tackle, the Vikings first pick, if the top corner or safeties are around, or Zabel. Yeah, the thing about the corners is that, and I could be wrong, and PFF simulator could be wrong, and mock drafts could be wrong, but it looks like about a 3 or 4 corner class early, and then there's a pretty big gap. And the other guys are expected to go in the middle of the second. So if we were talking about trading down for Trey Amos, trading down for whoever else it might be, a corner, Siobhan Revel, like, those guys are projected to be in the second round. So what I was looking for with this list was guys who are projected to be in the top 15. So I understand what you're saying with corner or left guard or safety being a little more of an immediate priority. The thing about defensive tackle is, if you can, I think the Eagles really show this, if you can have these guys running 500 to 600 snaps, they can come in hair on fire and just do their job. And the two guys that they got were in free agency, 30-year-old dudes who you'd want playing 550 snaps a year. Harrison Phillips, when he graded his best by PFF, was more of like a 600, 500 snap player, which is not an insult. Like, that's great. That's worth a lot of money, but you'd rather have a bunch of dudes coming in. The offensive linemen don't get to rotate. They got to be out there the whole time taking the punishment. The defense, they can throw out whoever the heck they want. And you see it from Philly. Those guys come in fresh, just flying. And you've also seen it from the Vikings where they've gotten worn down. And I'd like to see them have a little more rotation. And KOC talked about that for sure, that at the owners meetings, that they'd like to see. He mentioned Redmond. He mentioned Taki Taimani, who was interesting last year. Levi Drake Rodriguez as guys who they'd like to rotate in around the veterans. But if you could get your hands on a Derrick Harmon or Kenneth Grant, that would be even better. Steven says, one reason not to take a DT early is you can grab a solid DT prospect later. So I agree and disagree. Like, I think that in this draft, solid, yes. Can you get one that's going to be on your team for 10 years? No. Very unlikely. If you look at all of the top, and wide receiver and defensive tackle are very similar this way. All of the top paid defensive tackles in the league are all first, second, or third round draft picks. I mean, mostly first and second. Every single one of them is either first or second round because it's such a physical position, and you're getting drafted at the top if you're a freak like Kenneth Grant. That freaks go high. And I think it's hard to find freaks in the middle rounds. Can you find solid? Yeah, you definitely can. Can you find run stuffers? Oh, everywhere. TJ West from Indiana, like, great run stuffer. Oh, sure, go ahead. Can you find a 340-pound dude at 6'3" who moves around like he's 290 pounds? Probably not. So I think difference makers, guys that get second contracts, those are mostly very high picks at that position. Steven says the cliff drops off for interior O-line after Donovan Jackson and Tate Ratledge on day 2. Yeah, I really like Donovan Jackson. Tate Ratledge, we'll see. We'll see if he goes day 2. That's probably a guard position. I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, this doesn't seem to be a draft that has a deep group of guards. It seems to have a handful of guards, then you better plan on moving a tackle to guard. So I agree with you on that. If you're getting that starter, you should probably go with someone who's like Gray Zabel. Now, a lot of you are agreeing with Gray Zabel. Steven does bring up that is it Cody Mock is the only guy who was drafted that's worked out, and two other ones haven't. I'm not concerned about that at all. They're different people. I all the time we run into this in the draft. Ohio State quarterbacks, they all bust until they don't. I mean, it's the same thing. That's how Rodgers dropped in the draft. I think it's one of those draft myths. He is a different person from Radens and the other guy. They're just different people. And if you're looking at his physical talent, his positional flexibility, the way he performed at the Senior Bowl, uh, all those things check a lot of boxes for me. If they don't for the Vikings, well, then don't take him, of course. But just the way that I'm looking at him as a long-term type of player with his talent, his physical ability, I'm not, if he's getting this type of conversation going to NDSU, I'm not going to say, well, the jersey he wore is going to keep me away from him. I'm not going to say that because he's just a different guy. Nathan, is anyone on the Vikings defensive coaching staff could step in for the DC role? Concerned that Brian Flores will be getting a head coach position next year. Uh, yeah, I mean, Durante Jones is the guy, the defensive backs coach, who has been someone I've had circled for a long time. He has worked with this defensive back group brilliantly, I think, over the last couple of years. Harrison Smith told me last year that one of the reasons he was having so much fun was working with Brian Flores, of course, but he also said, and I would add Durante Jones into that as someone that he's really enjoyed working with, that's pushed him. And Durante has worked in multiple different systems. He's been with Brian Flores for several years, and you want to keep this type of system if that happens, because a lot of the same players are going to be here. Ivan Pace, Blake Cashman, the edge rushers, Dallas Turner's development, the corners who are young and coming along. Like, there's a lot of the foundational pieces that will be here over multiple years. So if Flores were to get a job somewhere else, that Durante could step in and run a very similar defense. Doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the same, because Flores has something very unique to him and special. But I think Durante has been around a long time now, working in a lot of different places. He worked for Zimmer. He worked at Alabama and on that side with their defensive schemes with Nick Saban, and then back with Brian Flores. Like, this is somebody who's highly respected around the league. And um, somebody I mentioned to somebody who works for a team that was hiring, I think on the defensive side, or considering hiring a defensive coordinator. I was like, you should interview Durante Jones, because he's really done a great job with this team. So that's the guy that I would pick. But, I also think too that, I mean, it's April, so we don't have to worry too much. I mean, you get a neck roll for that question. That's a neck roll question. If Nathan is sitting here going, I'm worried about losing Flores next year, like, that's you're deep. You're deep in. Like, let's see if they play a football game first. Then we'll see how it all plays out from there. We don't have to worry about it yet. And I also think that this year was probably telling again for Brian Flores. I mean, everybody knows that he deserves a job. The performance he put on last year, 14-win team, top 5 defense. It was not the top 5 most talented defense. They made fools of a lot of good teams. I know it didn't end very well for the defense either. It wasn't just Sam Darnold, but they were a great defense last year. And Flores, let's not forget, he won a lot of football games as the Miami Dolphins coach. The relationship with the quarterback was not very good, but they won more games than they lost when he was there for the last few years, after they were trying to get him to tank and allegedly trying to pay him extra to lose football games. Allegedly. I mean, the guy's a good football coach, and he's an unbelievable evaluator. I mean, how many times ever in the history of football has a fan base and media just said, well, if that guy likes him, then we just believe it? And he's going to miss eventually. I mean, I'm sure. And who knows who that might be, because no one's perfect, but he is as good at evaluating players as I have ever seen. Ivan Pace, Josh Metellus, undrafted free agent linebacker just comes in, sixth round safety who had only been on special teams, and then he becomes a star. I mean, it's wild. The stuff Brian Flores has done in identifying players and identifying talent. Andrew Van Ginkel, what was his career high? Like 6 sacks. And I thought he was a good player before because he had really good data. But I mean, what? Like second team all pro, multiple pick sixes, 11 and a half sacks. Like what? This guy knows what he's doing. So he's special. And he got a couple of interviews. He didn't the year before. It just feels like it's still not going to happen. And there was some movement the other day on the whole thing, but the lawsuit, but maybe not until that's resolved, or maybe not ever with the way that the NFL owners hold their grudges. I don't know. Maybe someday for Brian Flores, but it's not something I'm thinking too much about with him. I think what they need to do is, I want to say Ben Gessling wrote something about his contract not too long ago. Just make him the highest paid DC in the NFL, keep him and KOC in lockstep for a long time, get a Spagnuolo, Andy Reid situation, and go forward with this leadership. I mean, when Mark Wilf said to us the other day in Florida at the owners' meetings that he loves this leadership and wants to keep it together, I mean, who wouldn't with this group? The way that they have achieved so far, and playoffs have to happen. But I think 34 wins in 3 years versus the rosters. And last year with the defenses in 2023, which I thought the 2023 defense was probably going to rank 25th with the talent. And then last year we were saying, well, maybe borderline top 10, and it's top 5. If that didn't earn him a job, then it's going to be hard to get in the future. But the consolation prize is that he gets to be here with a super talented defense now. Ryan says, hope Tyler Warren's on the list. The tight end that can block better than TJ Hawkinson, gets open quicker than Oliver, would be huge for this team. There's just nowhere to play him. And that's what Kevin O'Connell said to me the other day when he was giving me a hard time about the wide receiver thing. But like, his point about the best player available was you can't draft a best player available who can't get on the field. You're not drafting Tyler Warren when TJ Hawkinson is one of the highest paid players in the NFL. You just can't do it. And Josh Oliver is going to play a ton. And I wouldn't be surprised if they re-sign Josh Oliver or extend him at some point, because they love Josh Oliver. And that combo is one of the best combos in the NFL. I think some of you are a little down. There's been a handful of people who have said to me, like, should they draft a tight end? And they just made TJ Hawkinson the highest paid tight end in the NFL the year before. They love TJ Hawkinson. They think he is an incredible Pro Bowl star player. And I would agree when he's not coming off of an ACL injury. I thought he was pretty good. And maybe we'll have a quarterback that's not always looking past him down the field to Justin Jefferson. But I don't think that there's any reason to look at the tight end position at all. I mean, this is just, yeah, you could make some sort of like, Gronk, Aaron Hernandez argument or something, but there's not too many teams that are running 2 tight ends and, every play. I mean, this is really an offense that's rooted in 3 wide receivers that mixes in 2 tight ends. And Josh Oliver is the perfect mix in second type of tight end. I'm just against drafting tight ends high. Look at TJ Hawkinson's a great example. They take so long to develop. They often show up with some other team and turn out really good. Would you be surprised if Kyle Pitts finally emerges, or they don't sign to his 5th-year option and then eventually he just becomes good with some other team? That's kind of TJ Hawkinson. Nathan says, will the Vikings have too many places that might not be able to perform in a more traditional defense? Do you mean pieces to too many? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. But I don't think that any defense these days is traditional. When you look at a 3-4, maybe that's what you mean. If you look at a 3-4 defense, and go back, I love doing this. I love going back and watching games from 2005, 1997. What was the game? I was watching Brady Manning from 05. It was Al Michaels and John Madden on the call. Great stuff. And Peyton Manning kind of gets the monkey off his back a little bit in New England, where he hadn't won before. And it's a great game and everything, so all that. But one thing you notice about the defenses is they just stand there, and the offenses just stand there. Everyone's just like, ready, set, football. And there used to be that kind of thing. Like sometimes you'd see motion. The 91 Washington team with Joe Gibbs, they were famous for using motion and bunch sets more than anybody else. And they were one of the best teams of all time. But it didn't really stick in the 90s and 2000s that where those traditional defenses and offenses were being played. And bunch formation started to get a little bit more spread is what everybody started to talk about with 3-4 wide receivers, nobody in line, that kind of thing. And defenses still, though, even as they were getting spread out, they would just stand there. And offenses would run a little bit of motion. And what you could do as a quarterback is if the defender moved with the wide receiver in motion, you're like, oh, he's in man coverage. And if he didn't, you're like, oh, he's in zone coverage. Now you could still do that, but it's not a guarantee anymore. Now defenses move around. They make so many checks. They make so many changes. They have so many answers. They have people lining up over here, moving over there, Harrison Smith, line of scrimmage, then he's dropping back, all that stuff, that there's really no such thing as a traditional type of 3-4 defense like there used to be. There might be plays where Andrew Van Ginkel's just lined up over the guard. And you're like, okay, that's what they decided to do on this play. And one of the things that makes Brian Flores so good is that he takes all these pieces and he makes it work. And you're good at this. You're good at this. You're good at multiple things. Let's bring it all together and make it work. And the one thing he was really lacking is something that they got, which is, what if Brian Flores, just want to drop everybody back in coverage on a first down or something? 4, you rush up front, everybody else drops back. And now they can do that with Javon Hargrave and with Jonathan Allen. And those will have a trickle down effect to where they could just do that more, as opposed to every single time it feels like they've got to send some sort of blitzer. Or I mentioned Harrison Phillips, who has some ability to get after the quarterback, but so much of his job has just been moving bodies up front. If you watch, it's really fascinating to watch, where it's like he's going to line up over the center, but he's going to rush to the right to try to take the center and the guard so you can blitz in Ivan Pace. Well, what if he just lined up in the A gap and went after the quarterback along with Jonathan Allen, who's maybe in the B gap? And maybe you get a little more pressure from Harrison Phillips this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, because there's just more danger up there for defensive lines. So Matt says, don't hate picking Starks, but really liked Watts and Mabuka from what I've seen. Yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of deal where it's, who would I stick and pick for? Give me the best guy in the whole draft. Not the, he's a pretty good prospect. He's the 3rd, 4th safety. Well, that's great. I mean, Watts gets a lot of hands-on footballs, but Starks, that could be a star. I think that's like a higher ceiling type of player. So that's where you're taking a shot at. And that's why picks 15 through 25 create way more value than picks 40 through 50, is there's just more stars. Sean says, you have a choice of getting Derrick Harmon or Kenneth Grant. Do you still take Grant? Oh, I see. Harmon or Grant. Do I still take Grant, or do you lean to Harmon? I would, Harmon was higher on my list, so I would probably lean to Harmon. Now, some of it is, I'd love to know what they think. I'd love to just know the debate inside of their building of, like, can you tell me that you guys see upside with the ability to create pressure from Grant? If you told me that, I mean, he could be a little more dominant of a player, but Harmon, I mean, this guy just crushed everything in his way with pass rush. I'm always going to, and he wasn't a joke in the run as far as his grades go. I know some people have brought up that he missed some tackles, but I mean, when you talk about getting into the backfield, penetration, pressuring the quarterback, what's more valuable in the NFL than pressuring the quarterback? It's probably nothing. I could tell you the numbers on this of just how valuable it is to pressure the quarterback, and why we've obsessed over this defensive tackle thing. This is the offseason of the Vikings saying, fine, stop talking about this already. Stop talking about the guard already. Stop talking about the DT already. Let me look at quarterbacks. I got the PFF up here. Quarterbacks when pressured versus not. And the numbers are so crazy of NFL quarterbacks when they don't have pressure are really darn good at football. And when they are pressured, they become very average. So how about this? Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow were the only guys in the NFL last year to have quarterback ratings over 90. So if you're under 90, you're like a backup quarterback, right? Only guys to have numbers over 90 when they were pressured. Sam Darnold was third in the league under pressure, ironically, since that's what melted the Vikings at the end, with an 87.1 grade. And there are even really good quarterbacks in here. Matthew Stafford had a 50 quarterback rating when pressured last year. Patrick Mahomes, 74. Josh Allen, 73. Jalen Hurts, 72. I mean, pressure just turns great quarterbacks into average or backups. And with a clean pocket last year, Lamar Jackson had 131 quarterback rating. In fact, there were 18 quarterbacks over 100 with clean pockets. There's nothing more valuable than getting in the quarterback's face and causing pressure. That's the whole point. So Derrick Harmon would be my pick because of that, but I still like Kenneth Grant. I really do. Preston says, since the Vikings' current roster is pretty solid, what if the Raiders wanted to trade up to 24 and get a second first-round pick this year by offering the Vikings their first in 2026 plus some lower round pick? There's always, as I present the argument for sticking and picking, which I have become a little more convinced on is a good idea. Just take the best player, try to get a star. There's always exceptions, Preston. And if you're going to tell me that the Raiders will say, all right, move down, but we're going to give you a first next year. The only thing is the Vikings do want, and I got that indication from KOC the other day. It sounds like they want somebody who's going to play. And I mean, even Dallas Turner last year, as down as everybody was on Dallas Turner, he played snaps. He made plays in games. He was a contributor to that team. He got a key interception in Seattle, a big sack in Chicago. He was on the field. So you do, in a circumstance like this, where you are trying to win, want to thread that needle. I've talked about now and later. Like Gray Zabel, for example, is a guy who can compete right away. And if he wins the job over Blake Brandel, that means he was awesome. And then he could play right away. Or he can develop and be a later guy too. So a little bit of now and later. But I do think that it would be their preference to find players who they could get on the field because they're coming off a 14-win season with no playoff wins in 3 years. They want to win. They're not looking at this year like, oh, well, let's just develop some guys. Like that could pressure them a little bit more to find someone who can contribute right away, which would mean you would maybe turn down some trade offers. But someone comes to you, hey, move down a little bit. We'll give you a first. I mean, my gosh, you got to do that. But I don't know how desperate the Raiders would be. Matt says, can't they just move the kickers back? I don't really get it, man. I don't really get it. With the kickoff, I just don't get it. What they should be looking for is when the kicker is really good, he can create a touchback, and that's worth something. So the kicker talent matters. If your kicker is not good and he can't reach the goal line, the other team gets the opportunity to return. But now it's almost like, well, kickers, you just can't even use your talent of kicking it into the end zone because then you harm your team by being better at football. That's weird to me. And also, if we're going to go, this is just, it could be ludicrous. If we're going to go from returning 30% of the kicks, which I thought was fine, 30, 40, I'd like it in the range, to what? Either 70%, which you're just returning all the time. It's having a huge impact. Or you kick it into the end zone, they get it at the 35 and they're 2 passes away from scoring. I just don't like it. I totally agree with you. Slide the kickers back 5 yards, reduce it by a few more percentage points, get a few more returns in the game, a little more excitement, and then go from there. But it goes out of the back of the end zone, so your kicker kicks it the best you could possibly kick it and then gets punished. That to me is silly. I don't like what they've done with it, unfortunately. Because I really wanted the kick return back. You guys know how much I wanted it back. I name off all these kick returners and how fun they were. I want it back. I want kick returners to matter, but I don't want kickers to be punished for being too good at kicking the football. Chris says we're totally moving a pick next year to move up and get an extra pick this year, especially with the expected comp picks in 2026. You know, Chris, I did think of this. I did have this thought. when I was putting together my little list, because here's why I see stick and pick as being very reasonable. Let's say the Vikings have 14 true, this is a guy I see as a difference making potential star player in the NFL. Let's say they have 14 of them. They're drafting 24th. Well, if it's the right position or the way the board falls, that guy can be there. That guy, just for example, with Dallas Turner, like that guy might be there a few spots ahead of you. Could I see them dipping into next year to go up a spot, 2 spots, to make sure they get one of their guys out of their 14? I could see it. I could see it. That's more in line with the way they've handled the draft the last 2 years, as opposed to the first year trading down and trying to get more bodies. So if you're in a position where you have so much talent on your roster that you really just want the absolute best player you can get your hands on, and that guy, and you've got to the 21st pick, and you really think the next team is taking them, okay, let's dip into next year's draft capital to move up. It's antithetical to some of the like traditional analytics way of thinking of stack picks, but it's also in line with how they looked at it last year with Dallas Turner. Like, let's just go get our guy. And the jury is out on it, but I think it's an interesting conflicting philosophy of, you can make an analytics argument that superstar players move the needle, not just pretty good players. You need to get them, but you could get them in free agency. You can't get superstar players in free agency. Go through free agency. I looked at this for my article, purpleinsider.football, by the way. I looked at this for my article where how many players actually got more than $20 million, which would indicate a superstar in free agency. And the answer was like 5. And one of them was Sam Darnold, which is a very unique situation for a guy to win 14 games and be a free agent. And then it was like Devontae Adams, a couple more, technically Stephon Diggs, but that's not really that much. It's not really the contract. I mean, very few superstar game changers. It's mostly complementary players. You fill in complementary players. So if you're drafting, you could go on the idea that you're hunting superstars because you can get complementary players. Now, if Kirk Cousins was your quarterback taking up 20% of your cap, then you need bodies. So it's different than it is where you can spend $300 million in free agency. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Skol SC says PFF board could be different than. Yeah, so what I looked at was the public boards and mock draft database that has a lot of like consensus type of picks. But yeah, I mean, we never really know how the league actually feels about it. Every time in the draft, I do my yearly rant about how, like, I guess the draft analysts didn't know everything, even though we gave them all that credit en route to the draft. We just assumed they were right about everything. And then on draft night, it was actually quite different. So, you know, who knows how it's actually going to play out when we get there. Steven, no, Durante Jones did not take a defensive coordinator job this year. He got interviewed for one, I think. Maybe it was New Orleans. I think it might have been New Orleans. Let's see. Rascal Lover says, for me, the priority is offensive guard. I got NFL Plus looking at the tape. All right. Let's throw him a neck roll. Rascal Lover, you get a neck roll for that. You bought NFL Plus to grind the tape just because you wanted to look at guards. There you go. Good stuff. Brandel looked okay to me at best. Not much depth, and I think we need to improve. Yeah, Blake Brandel, the thing about him is, I think he is a league average or below, a little below guard, which means that if he is the weakest point of your offensive line, that's not bad. Like, you can win with that if he is the weakest point. Now, if there's 3 weak points or so, if it's Cam Robinson, Blake Brandel, and Garrett Bradbury in pass protection, well, you're not going to win with entire left side and Brian O'Neill in the playoffs clearly playing through an injury. That's not really conducive to domination on the offensive line. But if a guy who is kind of coming along and had a good start to the season last year with Christian Darrisaw is the worst player you have, I think you're in pretty good shape. But I would agree with your assessment that okay at best is probably the way I'd put it. And What a draft pick might get you is somebody who could be a true difference maker. And if you have a difference maker at right guard because he's a nasty big old man in Will Fries, a difference maker at center in Ryan Kelly, who's made the Pro Bowl and is excellent, and then a difference making talent that may have some mistakes but could really move the needle at left guard, well, suddenly you got yourself an offensive line. Steven says Jay Ward was likely a B-Flow pick in 23. It's B-Flow's only miss. Well, not, I mean, maybe. Like, remember, Josh Metellus didn't play basically at all for a couple years, but also, I mean, we can't look at every defensive player that they've brought in. And that's a 4th round draft pick. And actually, I would even say that because he plays so many snaps on special teams and his depth that they didn't need last year because they stayed healthy, it's not somebody who was cut. He's still contributing to the team. So I wouldn't throw Jay Ward out just yet and call him a miss. But I mean, that is a 4th round guy. That would be a harsh standard if we start holding him to every single defensive player drafted in the 4th round is a hit or miss. But I get what you're saying. My point is just, somebody like Flores who came up in the scouting world and really understands the talents of players and what they can do and where they can fit. I think he assesses players. I asked him this. He told me this last year that he always asks, what can they do? Not what can't they do? And instead of saying, well, he's not tall enough, Ivan Pace, it's not fast enough, Josh Metellus, where could I see him fitting in? What role could I give him? How many snaps could I make it work with this guy? And that's how you get a lot of hits. Bradley says, what do you think about Harrison Smith being a coach for the Vikings after the season? I think what's hard to comprehend for anybody who hasn't done it is just how insane being an NFL coach is. Like how many hours. Harrison Smith has fairly young kids. I think I'm sorry if I've got that wrong for how many kids. I thought it was multiple. I think that it's way more hours in the building away from your family than actually being a football player is. So a player, it's a long day. Like you go and you grind, but the actual work day of an NFL player is not crazy different from your work day. Like Harrison Smith, they don't all show up at 5:00. They tell you that, they make it seem like that. Quarterbacks do, but the other positions, they show up at say 7:00. I'm not saying Harry doesn't show up early, but let's just say 7:00, and they will be leaving the facility at 5:00, sometimes a little later, but that might be about it. It's more of a Monday through Friday type of job. And then he's going to go home. He's going to watch film. He's going to study. He's going to do all those things. But when you're a coach, those days can be 12, 14, 16 hours. And then, the travel and all that sort of stuff. It is a absolute grind. A lot of it's sitting at a computer being a coach. Terrence Newman found this out. A lot of it's sitting at a computer, just being asked to look at specific things and study specific things. And you're just watching film all day and putting together reports and stuff like that. Like if you're grinding to work your way up the ladder, I don't think that a player like Harrison Smith works his way up a coaching ladder. I think if anything, maybe he would love to be a high school coach or something like that. Or, he might just want to play golf. The guy, what more can you ask from this man to give to the Vikings? I think he wants to play golf. That's what I would do if I had his contracts and career. That's what I saw John Randall on the plane on the way down to the owners' meetings. I don't know why he was going to the owners' meetings, but I saw him and I was reminded, like, that's what John Randall does. John Randall just plays golf and he's always tweeting about it. Like that's you have an awesome NFL career and then just play golf. That sounds great to me. Let's see. Gazinkad says, I need a way to spread out the word best player available that is also a position of need with added value. And your acronym for that is bit pump and wave. Yeah, I don't think it's catchy. Not as catchy as BPA. I think BPA, and I'll give you a neck roll for trying that. But I think the BPA is implied. It's implied that you're not going to draft a position where clearly you have nowhere to put someone. My argument about wide receiver is you always have somewhere to put wide receiver. If you draft Luther Burden, think about this. KJ Osborne got 90 targets, 9-0 in 2022 in KOC's offense. 90. Wide receiver 3 with Thielen and Jefferson, and the man got 90 targets. That's a lot of value from a wide receiver 3. And even if the first year, even if the guy gets 35 catches and makes plays, and that's added value, that's worth $10 million of value. And that's how you can really pinpoint it, right? If you draft a tight end, where are you putting him? He's just not playing. If you draft a tackle and you don't move him to guard, he's just not playing. So I think everybody understands that you're not drafting. If the best player available is a tackle, you're not drafting a tackle. You might move down a couple spots. Aaron says, do you look at edge as a possible day 3 pick behind Grenard, Van Ginkel, and Turner is lights? Yep. Gabriel Murphy, Bo Richter. I do think that Murphy and Richter are guys who could take a step. When a guy is really good on special teams, we kind of go like, yeah, who cares special teams? But it is an indicator a lot of times. And Bo Richter was terrific. I wrote about him last year. Terrific on special teams. And his athleticism is very high. That's what got him into the NFL. He only really had 1 year of playing as an edge rusher where he put up a bunch of numbers, but his athleticism numbers were freakish. And Gabriel Murphy was a highly productive guy. So I like that, but I don't disagree with you that as you get into that undrafted free agent, the depth, that a day 3 edge rusher might be worth looking at. Or what they could do also is just look at the remaining final wave of free agency. Maybe there's one more guy out there who's a veteran who's got some experience doing that, but they could use one more as just depth and special teams. But I do think the fact that, well, we'll see. I mean, they're not going to draft one in the first round, but the fact that they haven't gone out and gotten a Patrick Jones replacement is probably telling that it was not a priority, that what they're saying, because I've always said to you guys, it's what they say, or it's what they do and not what they say. Well, no replacement for Patrick Jones to me is a what they do about Dallas Turner. I believe them when they say that they're really buying what Dallas Turner did at the end of the year. And if you projected it out over last year with some more snaps and his growth, if the season had gone 25 games or something, I think we would have seen Dallas Turner even take a bigger step. Here's another thing I ran into. It's worth mentioning about Dallas Turner. I'll probably dive into this at some point. I was looking at a PFF study done by one of their data scientists from a few years ago, Timo Risky, very, very smart guy. And the worst production of any position in year 1 in the NFL is edge rusher. The worst production of anyone in the NFL, edge rusher. Now, that wasn't for Jared Verse and it wasn't for Myles Garrett, but a lot of guys, there's tons of examples. So you really can't judge that position until we've seen at least 2 seasons and maybe even a little more than that. Bradley says, I think Turner would have played more if I think you mean if he didn't get dinged up, but let's see. I don't think they expected to see Van Ginkel and Grenard. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Oh, if anyone got dinged up. No, that's a great point. No one got banged up. And the one game, was it against Indianapolis? The one game that Van Ginkel did get a little dinged up, Turner had one of his best games when he came in and got actually more snaps. So I'm still like, you don't want to see a guy not put up huge numbers when he's a first round pick, but extenuating circumstances, I think, were there with Dallas Turner. One Steven says Tyler Booker may be a set it and forget it left guard at 24. In terms of him not being a fit for outside zone scheme, are we really running that anymore? Yes, I think so. I think they still will be running that. Now, they're not going to run with, you mean with Kelly and Fries. They're not going to run a traditional, everybody goes out like the Gary Kubiak, but it still has some of that. Like some of the best runs from Aaron Jones last year are pitches to the outside that have everybody on the move. And it's not just about outside zone getting wide. It's also about working to the next level. And I was listening to Nate Tice and Mike Tice do a podcast about the offensive lineman, and I fast forwarded to Tyler Booker, and I agreed with what he said about Booker. My one concern is that there's not a explosive element to his game. Like, yeah, he's a big guy. That guy has not always succeeded in the NFL, and there's not that quickness. And you think about the DTs we're talking about these days, I have more nervousness about Booker. Another Steven does not want a guard at 24. I think that's fair because we do talk so much about the positional value. But I think that when we get to the end of the first round, that's when I look at it and throw that out the window. Just take the best player at that point. If you're talking about the very top of the draft, okay, take the Travis Hunter, take the offensive tackle, from LSU, who apparently has long enough arms now, and you want those premium positions. But when you get to the back end, if you can get the best player in the draft at his position, that's pretty good. Web TV OG says who replaces Addison during his suspension. I assume everybody just slides up one spot unless they draft a wide receiver. And maybe KOC was trying to throw everybody off the scent by mentioning it the other day and sort of seeming to shoot it down. I don't know. Maybe he actually believes in it. Maybe it's Luther Burden who slides into the spot. Probably not. I would say more likely than not, it would be Jalen Naylor just goes and plays wide receiver 2. Everybody moves up a slot, and maybe Rondale Moore or somebody else that they've developed. Sean says no one talks about Kelly helping raise the floor for Brandel. Possible. How much is that? Does that happen? I mean, maybe. I think that's very hard to pin down. Kelly could make a big difference for him, especially when it comes to pass blocking and reducing pressures he allows. I don't know. I am not confident. Tricky KOC. Yeah, maybe, right? Maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to convince them. I was retweeting Randy Moss, old Randy Moss gets drafted clips, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, they didn't need a wide receiver. Just saying. I'm trying my best to push my agenda. They do not care about what I think about this. The point on Kelly helping Brandel, I think it works for run blocking. I think it does work for communication. I don't know if Garrett Bradbury did have communication problems or not, or if that's a quarterback thing from last year. I mean, it's so tricky to pin down who impacts who and how. Like, I believe you fundamentally that a better center should impact his guards. I definitely do. But how much better? Brandel has limitations. He's just not a great athlete. And I think there is sometimes where he gets kind of over his skis, like, if you know what I mean, sort of lunging forward. And I think that guys can get underneath him a little bit. And then there's just slower to identify stuff from that position because he'd always played tackle. I don't think he's a bad player at all. I just think that there's some weaknesses there that I don't know if they're resolved by Kelly. If he is the starter at left guard, though, again, I think you're a really good offensive line. Son of a Beavers, is there a running back you think could be a steal on day 3 or undrafted, maybe a kick returner? There sounds like there's about 20. Doesn't there? Doesn't it sound to you like there's about 20 running backs? I like it. I like what you're suggesting. Damian Martinez is a guy who's come up a few times. The guy, Bashal Tootin, crazy fast. Some people think he's the best running back in the whole thing. Some people think that he's a 5th round pick. Jarquez Hunter is great. Trevor Etienne is really good. Jordan James is interesting. Somebody brought up Ollie Gordon. I haven't seen him play, but somebody brought him up. Donovan, the last guy mentioned on the PFF draft sim I'm looking at right now is Donovan Edwards, who had an awesome combine and it was really good in 2022. Like, it's crazy how this draft works, but I'll have to take a look a little closer and see if there's anybody who has the kick returning potential. Brashad Smith from SMU. Like, I could just name a bunch of guys. Devin Neal. I don't know where RJ Harvey's going, but I like him. That might be an option though. RJ Harvey is someone who could have. Bashal Tootin has got kick returner written all over him. That might be a guy. Cold to gold. What's the skinny with Asante Samuel? Do we have the cap space? They have the cap space. I don't know about Asante Samuel. They could sign him. They might not. I know that some people have talked about him signing here. I could definitely see it happening, but I don't know if it's happening. We're going to get a couple of more emergency podcast-ish type of stuff, I think, after Is a backup quarterback or Asante Samuel worth an emergency podcast? I lean very much yes. But I could see it. I mean, they have enough cap space to sign a couple of guys if they want to. They also want to carry over some of that cap space. They also want to keep some cap space available in case they have to do something midseason with a trade, which is a real possibility. All right, we've gotten to the bottom of the comments section. Great stuff, guys. Great stuff. Threw some neck rolls, had some good discussions. But once we reach the bottom of the comment section, that means it is time to go to the bullpen and bring in intern Clay Petrie at the University of Pennsylvania to have a little Clay's Corner action. So, Clay, what is on your mind about football this evening? Anything that I was talking about that you were thinking behind the scenes you wanted to discuss?
Well, you had me shocked with your list that I didn't see a receiver, but your explanation afterwards kind of made up for it and kind of eased me a little bit because I know you're big on the receiver train at 24. So
I am on the receiver train at 24, and I did think about putting Luther Burden there because I really like the way that he fits specifically into this. But I also think that when you look at just the general grades from the mock draft community of the wide receivers, there's a lot that fall into a similar category as Luther Burden. And I don't think he's some sort of perfect, flawless fit. This isn't Randy Moss falling to the back end of the first round or something. He's the most interesting to me for the Vikings, but it's kind of the opinion is, look, if they draft a receiver in the first round, like it would be great for now and later, tons of value, but also this group has some guys in the middle rounds, could be a third round pick. I think they need to make sure that they add one. But yeah, I did think about putting Luther Burden as the stick and pick, but I also think it's possible that you could trade down and still get him. We've seen this happen with wide receivers that go early in the second round instead and still turn out to be very good wide receivers. So that is why, but I'm not moving off of the wide receiver thing. That's for sure.
yeah, I think for the Vikings, the flow of the draft is going to be really important this year. Just seeing which position has more availability and which one they can probably like push back to the next round. So it'll be interesting to see what they go with.
Over under if Clay is going to call him old. Well, I guess we're gonna find out. Depends on these questions. You are getting called a Caleb Williams lookalike. Does he kind of look like Caleb Williams? Maybe. Well,
I'm
we
just
know
too
that.
scruffy right now.
Maybe that's it. We know that you're a Chicago guy, so maybe you start to look like your favorite quarterback. I don't know.
Yeah,
why don't we stop messing around with the comment section? Although you guys can still ask questions and throw your comments in because I'm good enough at this to answer your questions while also answering Clay's questions. So toss them in and react to his along with us. Where would you like to begin, sir?
Okay. So the NFL changed its policy on their stipulations for who can and can't be on Hard Knocks, and that makes the Vikings eligible for next season. If they were to be selected, what would be some things you look forward to seeing like behind the scenes?
So the thing about the Vikings and Hard Knocks is that I don't think it's very likely because they were also part of NFL Films productions on Justin Jefferson and the wide receiver thing and Kirk Cousins, and those were very recent. However, if they were to get picked to be Hard Knocks, they are a team with Super Bowl aspirations, but a really interesting dynamic of having a rookie quarterback, essentially, or a first year quarterback as a starter. And I think we would all be interested in the same exact thing, which is how does Kevin O'Connell really coach quarterbacks? We know that he coaches them, and we get inklings of how he coaches them, how he communicates, how they meet, how they watch film, how they set up practices, how he designs the scheme. And they're not going to show us his whole scheme on Hard Knocks, but the communication is the biggest part and fundamentally of why Kevin O'Connell is freaking good at this. And it would be incredible. I would just watch the whole thing of just how does Kevin O'Connell coach JJ McCarthy? What does he say to him? I mean, we got clips of that with Kirk Cousins, but this is totally different. He was taking a quarterback who was 30 something years old and working with him, but with a guy that he's molding as a young quarterback. That to me would be incredibly fascinating to just see the guy who is at the top of his craft at developing quarterbacks working with young JJ McCarthy. So, I mean, from that perspective, I think Vikings fans should be rooting for them to get selected because it would be so much interesting insight into that.
I think that's part of the reason why there was a lot of hype for the Bears Hard Knocks last season, because they had Caleb Williams come in, but we were exposed to like awkward conversations between him and Eberflus, like, "You good?" Like, checking in. Like, it would definitely be way cooler to see Kevin O'Connell, a quarterback whisperer, and see how he operates. And another thing I would love to see is the Vikings always crush the NFLPA report card, and I would just love to see like why or how they build this culture. Everybody seems to love it there, and it would just be nice to be able to go behind the doors and kind of see how they run things.
Yeah, and I think once again with the Jefferson one, we got hints of that, but truly an examination of how the Vikings, and it's, we give KOC all the credit. He deserves it. You're the front door of the franchise. When you're the head coach, everything starts with you. Whatever they paid him versus what franchises are worth is probably not enough. I mean, if you think about if the Vikings sold today, it'd be over $5 billion. What is it worth to have a culture inside the building that players want to come play? It's worth Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. Look at all these guys who signed. Byron Murphy staying, Aaron Jones staying. You don't have players running away from your team. And then what the owners have set, it's almost sometimes you're like, is there a criticism I can toss in there like with this? But they are the premier franchise for how they treat players in the NFL. And it's not just some random thing. It's something that Kevin O'Connell wanted to create. And I think the biggest thing for him is he had bad experiences in the NFL with culture. And then he was all over with different coaches as a coach. And I think that he is a very analytical person in that way, to look at a room and understand what everybody's thinking and what they need and be able to figure that out and understand the mistakes that he saw before. So rather than saying, well, this is how Belichick coached, so this is how I'm going to coach, say this were the things where he missed and I'm not going to do those. And even somebody told me, I think it was Garrett Bradbury told me that he's like, he really talks with us a lot about the schedule. And that means a lot to us. That means nothing to us. But think about this. I mean, if I used to work at a grocery store and radio stations, and if the schedule wasn't out or you just got thrown in wherever and nobody ever asked you when you needed to work, it could be chaotic. It could be frustrating if you're constantly trying to figure out. So even just to have a guy who meets with the leadership is like, when should we do this or whatever, means something to them and how families are taken care of. You and I don't care about the family room underneath the stadium, or if the wives and girlfriends and all that and everybody's family is invited to, parents and stuff are invited to different events and stuff like that. We don't care about whatever, play football, right? They care. They care how their families are treated. So you're right. I do think that would be very interesting to see behind the curtain with that.
It's funny that you mentioned the schedule, because even in college sports, like when I played football, it was there would be so many days where it's be like, why are we here? Like, we really don't need to be here. Y'all just kind of like keeping us captive. So it definitely does get frustrating in senses like that. But culture is one of the most, from a fan's perspective, I guess, is the most like slept on attribute or contribution to winning. Like, we always look at the players, the coaches, what are they like, the X's and O's and all that, but it really doesn't matter if the people in that building are not all on the same page and are all playing with the same mindset. So
son of Beavers says him getting cut by the Jets, KOC, was a really awful image, and he said that that's not how you treat people. It was, I don't know if you've ever seen this clip, probably not, but in the Hard Knocks that had the Jets, where Rex Ryan says, "Now let's go eat a snack," KOC gets cut, and it is an ugly scene because, and they won't even show these on some of them anymore, which really shows you how much watered down it's gotten, because it used to be like really raw. I think the how mean, I think it was, who was the GM at the time? Maybe Son of Beavers remembers. Whoever the GM was at the time, he didn't even let KOC sit down. And he starts berating him about, we traded a draft pick for you and you let us down and all this stuff. And all Kevin is trying to say is like, thanks for the opportunity and I'm sorry I let you down. And he wouldn't even let him talk. And it was just so awkward. And it was not how you treat people is exactly right. And I think that really impacted Kevin O'Connell for him to look at the way that he treats people and understand that every single player is trying to make it work and wants to succeed. And probably a lot of players have a path to success if they are treated the right way. And I heard somebody say once that he believes that you're not going to help every single player by believing in them, but what if you help 5? I mean, like, that's 5 more players than you would have had before. And a lot of times guys teeter on the edge. I mean, think about Josh Metellus' career. If Brian Flores doesn't come in and believe in Josh Metellus, he gets cut. Who knows what he becomes? And instead he comes in, and the first thing Metellus told me this, the first thing that he said to Metellus is like, I think you could play. I think you could play a lot more. I mean, imagine one of the best DCs in the league comes in. First thing he says to you is, nice to meet you. I think you could play more. Let's go. Like, all right, let's go. As opposed to here's what you can't do, or I don't, care about you or whatever.
Yeah. And it immediately gives you that confidence, and confidence is another slept on thing. Like, if a player loses his confidence, it's so hard to get it back. I know this isn't football, but Draymond Green, like, he used to be able to really shoot the ball, and then stuff happened, and he will say himself, he lost his confidence, and now he's not even close to the player that he was. And he's even scared to shoot the ball at times, he said. So that confidence is huge to instill in your players, and I think they do a really good job at doing that.
Seen it a million times. Imagine that you're now I don't think Kellen Mond was going to work out one way or the other, but imagine you're Kellen Mond and your head coach says he doesn't even want to see you on the field because he sees you at practice. Like, dude, what? Yeah, it was Mike Tannenbaum. And I will say, like, the league is nasty. It's not a nice friendly league, and I don't blame Mike Tannenbaum for acting the way that most of the league acts, but I think Kevin O'Connell looked at that sort of stuff and said, you know what? If I do it differently, players are going to want to come to me. And that's, it's not analytics, but it's like analytical of thinking, how can I get an edge? What if my edge is treating players like people? How crazy is it that that's an edge, but it's an edge? And so many guys come from that Bill Belichick tree and they go berate people over everything. And it's like, what good does this actually do you? But anyway, what else you got?
Yeah. So this is for Steven, who wanted some of the rule changes. The NFL talked about the Hawkeye technology and how it will be the new primary method to measure first downs. Do you like this change?
I don't think it does a thing, to tell you the truth. Do I like it? Well, I mean, okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Get the look on your face like, oh, here goes Gramps with talking how about it used to be. But look, they used to measure all the time. And then one day, and it wasn't actually that long ago, you were watching football when they used to do it, just kind of stopped. I think the NFL, somebody said to somebody, we just need to stop wasting our time with these measurements. Just look down the line and say first down or not. And they can also, as we saw multiple times with the Vikings last year, including screwing up Will Reichard before a field goal, they can call in to adjust it from whatever magical booth that they're in New York or wherever watching the games. They can buzz down and say, well, actually the guy got the first down, or actually he didn't. And they were already making that adjustment based on what someone somewhere was seeing. So having the Hawkeye technology to just not use the chain gang, plus there's still going to be a chain gang, I guess, just for the looks of it.
The vibes.
For the vibes. Like, how can you have football without a chain gang? Let's just keep them there as a backup if the Hawkeye technology fails. We all know what the real problem is. The real problem is a guy goes down on the ground, they pick up the football and they go, let's see, let's just 37-yard line, 37.5-yard line. And then the center walks out, picks up the football, sets it down at the 38. And you're like, where did he fall? Where is this? I mean, in a game that I just mentioned, franchises are worth $5 to $7 billion. We are really spotting the football just on vibes, just on like, I just like some guy, think about sometimes the guy spotting the ball is running from behind the play. Where'd it go? 37. Like, just, if you watch a game, sometimes it is just comical of where they set the ball down versus where a guy was actually tackled, until they can resolve that problem. And I think that they could resolve that problem 90%. But the problem is, from my understanding, Sam Schwartzstein, who is actually the guy who invented the kickoff and is big into NFL and technology and works for Amazon, he was tweeting about this. You start putting too many chips in the football, you got yourself a problem, which is that the football starts to weigh different. And you'd be like, what do you mean, this little tiny chip? Yes. The smallest amount of weight can change the way a ball travels. So if you put it in the front and you put it in the back and you put it in, right now, there's one tiny chip in where the laces are. So if you're using the over the top technology, whatever the tennis uses, I mean, maybe you can get an accurate depiction, but it's really where the middle of the ball is, but we're not spotting it on that. And I feel like a complete fool here talking about this because the answer is so simple, which is a person in a booth reffing off of the broadcast film who, right, Skycam, who can just see it. And if they see a miss, and that's another stupid thing. If it's a national TV game, then you know that they're watching closely and they'll adjust if a first down should be a first down. If it's like the fourth rated CBS game or something, they have 3 camera views and no one's paying attention. It's just, what the heck? Anyway, so I don't think this does anything, and I don't think it solves the major problem we all know needs to be solved. Stick a ref in a booth so he can watch what we're watching, period. Until they do that, I will not take any of this seriously.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't see how much it changes, but if it does lead to more better accuracy on the placement of the footballs, then I'm for it. Like if it speeds up the game, I'm for it. But again, I don't really think this is the main issue. Maybe if they tried on all plays, it's kind of weird that they're just using it for the first downs. But I don't know. I'm confused. I kind of just want to see how it plays out, and then I'll see if I like it or not. But
you'll just never notice it. Like, that's the thing, is you'll never really see. I guess who's going to tell them? Someone must have to tell them if they've got it wrong, or it's really just a measurement. It's really only if is it a first down or not, very close to the line, and that's how it will be done with this Hawkeye technology. So it sort of made it sound like, oh, they're going to do like digital spotting, but they're not. It's really no change at all. I have to give a neck roll to Son of a Beavers for asking if there's any UFL players to keep an eye on. My suggestion with the UFL would be to watch it like 3-4 weeks in, where the teams have actually gotten together. Because imagine trying to play pro football after having a 2-week training camp. Plus they had issues with their pay and whatever, which always happens. And some of the guys sat out practices. Like, it's going to be a mess for the first couple weeks. So give it time. So that is the rant on that. The obvious answer is right there for the NFL. It always has been, and they refuse to use it. What is your next Clay's Corner question?
So the next one is about the overtime rules. They changed it to match the playoff rules to where each team possesses the ball now. How do you feel about this change?
Didn't need it. I would like, okay, here's an opinion that probably the most people would disagree with that I have. There's a surprising number of people who love the wide receiver opinion. And I applaud all of you for that, because you guys get it. You get where I'm coming from. I thought that people would dislike that one, but they like it. Maybe because Randy Moss was a wide receiver 3 when he was drafted, and so you get it. But the opinion that I have, that I don't know how many times I've ever shared on this show, but I think most people would strongly disagree with, is I would be perfectly fine with ties. I would be perfectly fine if there was no overtime in the regular season and it was just ties. Here is why. One is it would encourage teams, if they score a game-tying touchdown, to go for 2. Or, oh, we're just going to pull up and tie the game with a field goal with 40 seconds left. We're going to kneel down on the ball. No. You have to go for the touchdown. You got to try to win the game, or you're going to get a tie. And I also think, like, you had all day to try to win this game. So I was fine with sudden death in overtime. And I would be fine with, well, you played the whole game and you ended up with a tie. I don't need more of this. But the playoff format, I guess it's fine. We'll probably see it 4 times in a season. I mean, there's just not that many overtime games in the regular season. Someone will have to tell me how many there actually were last year. There couldn't have been that many. We won't see it that many times. I guess it's fair, but you had all day for somebody to win this football game. I don't need everybody to touch the football, games to go on much longer, players to be out there playing way more snaps. You already have 17 games. Imagine if you have 2 overtime games in a season and you're playing for an entire extra quarter, you're playing 80 snaps in a game. Like I didn't need this change, but I understand why it's fair.
What if it's 35-35? Like, what? It doesn't have to be 3-3 or 7-7.
Well, that probably means that someone tied it either on a last second field goal or they tied it on a extra point where they could have gone for 2. Actually, 35-35 sounds to me like 5 touchdowns. Go for 2, win the game. And teams would play the whole fourth quarter to win the game rather than tie.
Yeah, this is I was not expecting this, but
I know, I can see it in your face.
yeah, I don't love ties. I want a winner and loser. I like your points. I get the whole extra quarter of play.
16 overtime games last season.
Yeah.
So out of how many games did they play? 32 teams playing 17 games and 16 were overtime. It's not going to matter that many times.
I don't agree. I'm not sure why yet, but I don't agree. Yeah. My initial reaction was I was just confused why they didn't change this when they changed the playoff rules.
Right.
I think it's weird to have playoffs and regular season different. But hopefully this will have teams more prepared, I guess, and won't have any more 49ers Chiefs moments. Not that is an excuse for the 49ers, but I think it just makes everything more consistent and clear.
One of the reasons that I am pro tie is that I've never come up with anything. And Bob mentions like having the kickers kick, 60-yard field goals or something to try to win it. I've never come up with something that I felt like really worked for me. The college thing is such a mess and a joke and it's laughable. And I love it. I love watching it, but it's so silly. You couldn't do it in the NFL, I don't think, especially since they are there all day sometimes. And this feels fair-ish, but then also, like, are they going to be able to finish the game? If you get a long touchdown drive and a long touchdown drive, and then you're still tied, then do we get a tie after that? Like, we're here all day.
Yeah, like, are ties eliminated, or is it just...
I would assume if you're tied after overtime, it's a tie.
Yeah, okay.
But what if a team takes all of overtime with a single drive?
And doesn't score.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I don't love any overtime option that's ever existed. So that's why I'm like, okay with ties. Plus I grew up with hockey and I was fine with hockey ties. I didn't need shootouts for that either. And here we are. I actually covered a tie in 2018 Vikings and Packers. They tied. It was the weirdest thing because usually to get down to the press box in Lambeau, you have to walk outside. So you walk over the fans, which is wonderful in late December. You walk over the fans. And if the Packers won, it's usually very rowdy. And if the Vikings won, you hear like a smattering of Skols and then boos or whatever. And it's, there's just a lot of noise going on. The tie, dead ass quiet. It was like there was no one there, even just people walking out going, what do I do? We just tied. What the heck do I do with my hands? So it is awkward and weird when you tie. I understand no one likes ties. I would just be fine with it.
Yeah. I would need to see the numbers on what the ties that we have now are like. If a lot of them are more like boring, low scoring games, then I could get on board with your point. But I think it is exciting when it's a high scoring game. Teams can't really separate themselves from the opponent. And then it all comes down to overtime. I think that's cool, but
I definitely, there's the pomp and circumstance of overtime. There's the coin flip. You're going out to the whole thing and that, but I just think it would increase the drama of every fourth quarter because no one would want to tie. No one wants to be at the Superdome with 70,000 crazy people or something and then tie and everyone goes, what? So that would be, so Digital Plains Media hates this. I mean, ties exist in the sport that's the most popular in the entire world of soccer. I mean, I don't think that the worst sports take you've ever heard. I mean, have you watched television? Anyway, let's move on then.
No, worst sports take ever heard.
Somebody said today.
In a worst sports take season, like that's...
How about this? Right. In today's world, like log on to anything. Yeah. I just said they should do it like other sports. But and also you cannot deny the entertainment value of it's 20-21. Last second touchdown. You can't just tie it and go to OT. You got to go for 2. That's the best drama in sports. So, anyway,
Can't argue that.
also, Bob says it's like kissing your sister. I would love to know who the first weirdo that came up with that saying. I've heard that a million times. Like, who thought of that? Well, anyway, here's the worst sports take that I've ever heard. Stephen A. Smith was talking today, and this is something he's quoting, so it's not him. I'm not insulting Stephen A. Smith. He was quoting someone from the NBA that said if Steph Curry had played back in the day, years ago, that he wouldn't have scored more than a handful of points a game because they would have just beat him up. That's the worst sports take I've ever heard. Okay, that's like 50 times worse than I'm fine with fourth quarter drama being increased. That's so much worse. Reggie Miller played. He just had big guys around him. Anyway, we're off the rails. What's the next thing?
Yep. All right. The next thing, so the Tush push is still alive, at least for now. The league couldn't come to a decision on it. Do you think it will survive the offseason?
I do, because nobody can come up with a real explanation for it. It sounds like people are just mad. They're just mad. We can't stop it. There's no real clear evidence about injuries. And there's not even actually a lot of teams. Yeah, Steven points out that Del Curry played back in the day and was a good player. I mean, shooting in basketball, it would never work. Like, what? I mean, the greatest shooter, he'll never make it.
It's impossible.
The way they make it sound. Look, I am old enough to say, like, there were brawls and stuff. It was more of a violent game, but like, it's not like every night they were just hitting each other with crowbars. It wasn't WCW/NBA. Guys dribbled around and shot the basketball. What are we talking about here? Steph Curry would make his shots in any era. My goodness.
I was watching the Bad Boys documentary earlier, and all those incidents happened right under the hoop. So it's like,
right,
they're not getting out 40 feet and throwing jabs at Steph Curry.
Right. It's not like Joe Dumars, who was a great shooter, was just like, all right, it's fighting time. Just throw down the mitts and like it's center court. I mean, they are so exaggerating how that used to be. But to your point about the tush push, somebody put out the numbers of how often teams did it. The Philadelphia Eagles, of course, did it a million times. And then the Bills did it a lot because their quarterback is 7 feet tall and weighs 300 pounds. And they screwed it up in a playoff game, so maybe they'll do it less. Everybody else barely used it. And if you're going to tell me this is some sort of widespread problem, it's this unstoppable cheat code play that everybody's using to succeed, show me the numbers that prove that. And here's the best counterpoint to me is that Tom Brady over his career, I did a story on this once. I actually asked Bill Belichick about it. About Tom Brady had a 90% success rate on quarterback sneaks. What they used to do, though, was the opposite of the tush push. They used to put all the wide receivers out, spread everybody out, and then have him sneak because you couldn't put everybody in the box. So you create a light box, 5 wide receivers or maybe a running back, and then he just sneaks up the middle. And it was great. And they had one of the highest rates of all time on you're going to ban that? Like, I mean, what are we talking about here? You're banning advancing the football in a sport that's all about advancing the football, not unless it's so dangerous people get hurt, and it's not. So it's just crybabies who can't stand that the Eagles won the Super Bowl and used a play that was not stoppable. But, Patrick Mahomes running around like a crazy person, making throws and stuff was not really been stoppable all that often either. Ban quarterbacks leaving the pocket. You can't stop Lamar. He keeps winning MVPs. It's just so silly.
Yeah. Hearing Sean McVay talk about it made me rage. He said the optics of the play don't look like a football play. Who cares? What? I think banning a play because of the way it looks visually is probably the most insufficient argument I've heard in a while. And
all those Eagles fans left the stands every time it happened. They threw garbage on the field. They were so mad that they just wouldn't attend games. I mean, come on. Oh, you know what? They have the TV ratings. As soon as somebody tush pushed, Everybody, sponsors pulled out.
Yeah, I don't, and you touched on it. Like
Come on.
I tried to look into the injuries, and I'm pretty sure there's a 0% injury rate on tush push plays. I don't think there's been a single injury. So until they could like point to stats and be like, this is why we want to ban the play. This is who's got hurt. These are the injuries. I don't think they have a real argument.
Bob says Larry Bird used to carry a revolver in his shorts to get space to shoot threes. I mean, that's the thing. And look, Larry Bird got into his handful of scuffles and everything else. But are we really treating NBA players in any era like they're UFC fighters? Come on, they're about as good as Major League Baseball pitchers at fighting each other. Are you serious? I mean, this isn't Tony Twist versus Rob Ray. Those are really old NHL fighters. This isn't like, I mean, the NHL with its fighting at one era was very dangerous and stupid, really. It was so out of control. They used to just have like UFC fights in the middle of the ice to start a game. That is dangerous and not right. The NBA never had that. The great shooters in all-time basketball. How about like Peja Stojakovic? I mean, that wasn't the toughest guy I've ever seen. And he shot 40-something% from three. I mean, come on. The only thing, here's the only thing that was different. And also we're acting like Steph Curry doesn't get people like trying to defend him. Here's the thing that's different is that his coaches never would have let him shoot this much. He would have made crazy high percentages and been a star. If you're making a point about why it would be different, it's that no coach would have ever believed it would work. And that's why he revolutionized basketball single-handedly, is he actually showed that it will work. But there's been all sorts of smaller shooters throughout NBA. Steve Nash, multi-time MVP. What was he, like 6 foot tall? Come on now. That's a way worse opinion than they should have ties so people will just try to win the game in the fourth quarter. Way worse opinion. Anyway, all right, next thing.
So they really got to you on that one, but it's fair. It's like, come on.
Just watch some. I mean, what are we taught? The old NBA and look, I lean into it. I loved the NBA in the 1990s. I love Michael Jordan, the Knicks, the Pacers, all those things that you saw in the documentary. I watched them live and all that stuff. I loved it. But now to hear older NBA players be like, this current player, he would stink. You're just like, who wants that? Who cares about what anybody thinks about that? So you shouldn't love Anthony Edwards? Like, I don't know, man. I watched Edwards play against Jokic the other day, and that was one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time. Maybe we could just like sports as they advance. But
yeah,
anyway.
Let's stop the generation comparisons. But anyway, my next question, the Cowboys traded a 5th-round pick for Joe Milton, and it's blowing up my social media pages, and I'm kind of confused why. Like, does this move really matter?
Algorithms. That's why. No, truly, I mean that. I really truly mean that. I mean that transactions, trades especially, but signings, they do clicks. They move the needle with people. They start debates. They create a lot of discussion. We take advantage of it here. I made the joke early, like, hey, if they sign a 4th-string corner, is that an emergency podcast? And the answer might be yes, because it moves the needle with algorithms, with interaction, with engagement, all that stuff. So people make way more out of it than they need to, because everybody knows that it draws a lot of clicks. If you wrote the best analysis piece of Dak Prescott 2023 or something, and it was brilliant, and you just made all sorts of great sweeping statements about his game and you would do nothing in comparison to instant reaction to Joe Milton to Dallas, even though Joe Milton may never play for Dallas. And I don't think he's even any good. He played that one game at the end of the season when no one's even trying. And I don't really think he's an NFL starting quarterback or anything like it. I don't know, maybe somebody can have that happen. He's a great athlete. Yeah. But I mean, I thought he was going to be a tight end coming out. He's got a crazy arm. He could throw it over the mountains. It doesn't really look like a starting quarterback to me, but those types of things, they just drive clicks and they just drive debates. And when it's Dallas, then it drives debates even more. Oh, Dallas went and got a quarterback. So yeah, you're going to wake up tomorrow, you're going to turn on the TV and 2 people will be screaming at each other about Joe Milton, and because then they can put out the video and then that gets more and like everything. This is a rant about how things are now is so much in football coverage. Maybe this is Aaron Rodgers adjacent with this irritation. Everything is just about what gets people fighting with each other rather than what we should actually be talking about. And I don't mean everything. You know, Dan Orlovsky does great stuff on ESPN, film breakdowns and things like that. And I enjoy that. But so much is just how can we rake in the most viewers who will yell at each other when we tweet out the video? And I get tired sometimes. The Joe Milton trade doesn't matter anything more than Trey Lance. Go back and look at Trey Lance to the Cowboys and how much coverage of that versus what that meant. It meant nothing, just like this. So,
yeah, I remember when Milton got drafted, there was jokes going around, people saying he still needs to learn how to play football. So the fact that he's getting all of this attention after one meaningless game is kind of crazy.
And demanding a trade. I think that's actually the funniest part.
Oh, he demanded? I didn't
he asked to be traded. So it sounds, at least from the report, it sounds like he asked to be traded to a team where he could compete for a starting job. So they traded him to the team that has the highest paid quarterback in the entire NFL.
Well,
I don't know if that was like on purpose or what.
Yeah, they got back at Joe. They're like, oh, really?
Well, I mean, they should be, right? You play one game in basically preseason.
Yeah, but Dak does have an injury history.
He does.
If he gets the backup spot, who knows? We might see him next year. But until we do, I'm not going to be thinking about Joe Milton a lot.
I will not be either.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got? One left?
Yeah, one last one. So the Browns owner called the Deshaun Watson move a big swing and a miss. So what are some other trades that happened in NFL history that you also consider a big swing and a miss?
Now this is might have to tell a little history lesson here. I mean, we might have to do it. The Minnesota Vikings,
I know this one,
made the worst trade in NFL history until this. Hey, actually, we should talk about that. The Minnesota Vikings trade is officially no longer the worst trade for Herschel Walker in history. This Deshaun Watson is the worst trade and the worst contract at the same time. They gave up a lot. Didn't they get Will Anderson with one of the picks? The Texans became a good team that went to the playoffs. They used their picks for good players. They gave out the worst ever contract, and he played so bad. I mean, this isn't, if he wasn't like an average starter, mediocre that went 8-9 or something, this was biblical. This was the worst quarterback you will ever see playing football in the NFL. My friend Austin Gale for The Ringer was tweeting out stats on him, like about QBR and different stats about like, hey, there's been 400 quarterbacks that have played since 1987 and he's like second to last or something. I mean, numbers that just you can't believe in how bad Deshaun Watson was. I think it easily clears the Herschel Walker trade as being that awful. And I'll always just add this in. There was no guarantee the Vikings were going to use those draft picks to get Emmitt Smith and whoever, all the other great players that Dallas got. I don't remember the list right offhand. Some of you sickos probably do, but yeah, I mean, I think it is as bad as it could ever be. And Herschel Walker has now been moved into second place. Do you have other examples?
Yeah, I don't have like the worst trades, but one that is like super weird to me was the Trent Richardson trade.
Oh, yes. So that's one of the worst trades in history. Oh, yeah.
He was drafted 3rd overall by the Browns, and he had a good rookie year. He almost had 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. But then 2 games into the next season, they traded him to the Colts for a first-round pick, and it's just really bizarre. But he did not do anything for the Colts, and then only lasted like the rest of that year and then the year after. And then he was done with football. So that's a pretty expensive first-round pick to just give away.
I found a list. CBS Sports did a list last year in May of the 10 worst player trades in NFL history. This is by John Breach. Okay. I will read it. So we got Herschel Walker's obviously number 1. Number 2 is the Broncos trading for Russell Wilson. I don't think that's nuts. I don't think, I mean, they missed the playoffs both years. They got rid of him. They had to pay a huge amount. Like Russell Wilson and the Broncos have to be so happy that they drafted a quarterback that got them to the playoffs and Deshaun Watson, because no one really talks about this being as bad as it was for Russell Wilson. I don't know if it's a number 2 in history. This has the Packers trading for John Hadle. Oh, he was the quarterback. That's a really old one. He was the quarterback for the Chargers or the Rams, was it? It was way back in the day. So that's okay. The Falcons trading for Jeff George. I don't know. They had a 9-7 season. That seems aggressive. And Deshaun Watson was 5, but it can't be 5 now. Okay, where's the rest of the list? Oh, it says you have to click here to get the rest of the list. What is with websites? What is with websites? So this list, DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because he was good for them. 2021, like it's not like they got nothing.
No, I think it was bad for the
Texans.
Yeah, because they gave him up for a bag of chips
I didn't think
something.
of that.
Yeah,
I didn't think of that. Okay, yeah. Oh, that was a bad trade. Yeah.
I think that one would probably get remembered more if Hopkins like extended his production in Arizona, because that first year he was there, it was like, oh my god, like he changed their whole offense, and then the suspension happened and he kind of railed off. But I think if he had 3-4 really good years in Arizona, I think that one would get a bump.
Yeah, I was just looking at it the wrong way. I wasn't looking at it from the Texans' perspective, who just got Duke Johnson back and nothing, maybe a second round draft pick. Okay, I agree with it. Trent Richardson on the list. Charles Haley being traded to the Cowboys. This is another old one, but the 49ers trading one of the best defensive ends ever to their biggest rival is levels of crazy that you usually would never see. Teams would not do this one today. And in Steve Young's A Football Life documentary, he's like, why would you trade one of the Hall of Fame defensive players to them? Brett Favre to the Packers. Yeah, Atlanta may have messed that up. The Oilers trading Steve Largent to the Seahawks is the rest of the list. So there you go. Yeah, there's some bad trades, but I think this one has gone all the way to the top. The Ricky Williams trade, this was, I mean, trading your whole draft for Ricky Williams is pretty bad too.
Yeah, for a guy that just wants to hide out and chill.
But he was a great Dolphin. He was a great Dolphin. The thing about the Saints and Ditka and Ricky Williams trade is, I don't know if it would have made a bit of difference. That they were just a joke of a franchise then. Weird how they got a great quarterback and everything changed. Interesting.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not sure about next week's schedule exactly yet for going live. We're in a little bit of a lull here in the schedule, but no doubt there will be plenty of live shows. So make sure you set the notifications. If you're enjoying watching the show, set the notifications so you see when we'll be going live. Appreciate your time, Clay's Corner, another well done Clay's Corner. And your mom was saying that you're better looking than Caleb Williams. So isn't that cute? She drops in and embarrasses you every time. I love that. Great stuff. Well done. And you're working on a film piece about Jordan Addison. So people should go over to purpleinsider.football, see my column about sticking and picking, the Friday mailbag that I'm got to go work on actually right now, and your article's soon to come. So thanks, Clay. We will talk to you very soon. Do you want to say football or something before you go?
Yeah, I'll hit up. Football, baby. Let's go.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, guess I can't top that. Was that like a Duval from Liam Cohen? Probably. Anyway, we'll get, that's why he's the intern. Got to work on it. So thanks everybody for watching / listening, and we will talk to you very soon. Football.